Hello and welcome to Noble Mind.
The Noble Mind podcast is brought to you by the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy.
Hello, I'm Dr. Kate King.
And I'm Alex Gökçe. In this episode, we talk with Tom Pedulla about meditation, depression, and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. Tom is a licensed clinical social worker and a faculty member and former board member at the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy. He maintains a full-time psychotherapy practice and facilitates mindfulness-based cognitive therapy groups in Massachusetts. Tom has been practicing mindfulness meditation since 1987. He's a contributing author of the book Mindfulness and Psychotherapy and co-author of Sitting Together, Essential Skills for Mindfulness-Based Psychotherapy.
You can learn more about Tom and his work at www.mbctboston.com. If you like this episode, hit subscribe and drop us a line on social media. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Noble Mind Podcast. You can also get our show notes and sign up for updates and bonus goodies at www.noblemindpodcast.com.
Hi, Tom. Thank you for joining us and sharing your time and expertise with us and our listeners. So we wonder if we can tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your work and how you got interested in mindfulness and meditation.
Sure, and thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here today. Let's see, I guess this is my origin story. I first became interested in meditation in 1987. And I was going through a difficult period in my life at the time. I was not a psychotherapist or a social worker at that time. I was working in the advertising business, and I was getting kind of disillusioned with the advertising business and feeling like I was needing something else in my life. Plus, I was just ending a relationship that quite painful. I was in therapy myself, dealing with some of these issues, but I felt like I needed something more than just psychotherapy, and got a book on meditation. And it was actually a book by Ram Dass called Journey of Awakening. And it contained very specific instructions on how to start a meditation practice, which is very similar to the Vipassana practice that I eventually learned from Vipassana teachers. And I just started meditating on my own, and it made a big difference in my life rather quickly. What he said in the book was you practice sitting 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening. Do that for 30 days and don't worry about it. Don't ask questions about it. Just do it for 30 days and then look back when you're done over the past month and see if things have shifted. And certainly things had shifted for me. That began a journey where I then began to study with Joseph Goldstein out at the Insight Meditation Society and Larry Rosenberg at the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center. I was really drawn to the Vipassana practice and eventually decided to leave the advertising business and went back to social work school in 1999, full-time, got my degree in 2 years. And my goal at the time was to open a private practice eventually, something that combined meditation and psychotherapy, partly because back when I first started meditating, it really had an effect on my own therapy. My therapy deepened. I was able to open up to feelings that I hadn't, had been walled off before. I cried for the first time in many years. And I'm sure a lot of that had to do with my meditation practice and just being more open to what was going on inside me. And I wanted to bring that to other people. So I'm kind of rambling here.
That's great. Yeah. What do you think it was that the meditation practice added, or what it was that you weren't quite getting at in your own therapy that somehow when you started the meditation, it sort of supplemented that or complemented that somehow?
I think primarily it was getting below the level of thought. Getting kind of unplugged from the thinking mind. I'm very much in my head, or I was then. I still have that tendency. I mean, I think that's just the way I'm wired. Mm-hmm. But then it was almost exclusively, I was just in my head all the time. Mm-hmm. And the practice got me, first of all, into my body and into my heart, into my feelings. And that just opened up a lot of doors internally that proved to be very helpful, very beneficial.
Yeah, I think maybe for really verbal or cerebral people, it's talk therapy. It can end up being just a lot of thinking and logic.
Yeah,
frontal
exactly.
lobe activity.
Yeah,
it may not be as helpful as being able to cut through that, like you're saying, into something else, something different. Yeah. Another follow-up is about, you mentioned you were drawn to Vipassana. Was there anything specific about that tradition that spoke to you more than others, or?
I think because it was very simple and didn't require a lot of beliefs in religion or deities. I was brought up Catholic and fell away from that like my junior year in high school. Even though earlier in my life, I had been very much a devout Catholic. I was an altar boy and a choir boy and the whole thing, but I eventually began to get very disillusioned with the teachings of the Catholic Church and organized religion in general. And Vipassana, especially, I was taught exclusively by Western teachers. And it was kind of a secularized version of Vipassana. And that made it more accessible to me and easier, a better fit for me.
Mm-hmm. I was also raised Catholic and ended up practicing in more of a Tibetan tradition, and have been really interested and curious how some of the sadhana practices, I'm starting to notice parallels in strange ways,
Yeah. I've heard it said actually that the Tibetans are probably the closest thing to the Catholics in terms of the Buddhists, and
right.
Vipassana is more like, I don't know, Unitarians or Quakers or more bare bones.
Right. There was something about that early exposure to ritual and incense and something like that must have been embedded and then sort of has come back around for me. So anyway, I digress. But so thinking about mindfulness, you had said it was in the 90s that you had started practicing, and it's become such a hot topic since then, and sometimes sold as a panacea. Right. It would seem it's the fix for everything, is to just experience it mindfully. So I guess from your own expertise in the area, I'd love to hear about what do you see as what benefits it does offer, or what some downsides or problems might be to how it's sold or practiced?
Well, in terms of the benefits, I think for a lot of people, mindfulness is a code word for coming back to the present moment. And I think that's the main benefit, is just a reminder for people to just pause, unplug from wherever their thoughts may be taking them, and notice what's happening in the present moment right here, which is the only moment we ever really have. This is where life is happening. It's the only time you can ever really experience life, is by opening to what's happening in the present moment. And I think that's the key to mindfulness. And then if you can also bring some curiosity and acceptance to what's happening in the present moment, which I think is also part of mindfulness, even better. What are some of the pitfalls or downfalls?
Maybe before you jump into that, you were saying coming back to the present. Mindfulness is kind of a code word for that. I like that. And then bringing curiosity and acceptance to that. So Alex and I were talking earlier about the sort of traditional definition of mindfulness, the sort of non-judgmental, present-focused awareness idea. We were kind of wrestling with this word non-judgmental, but I sort of like, you're sort of talking around that by saying being curious, which seems to me not to be judgmental, and accepting. So you're sort of taking that idea and phrasing it in a more positive way.
Right. Yeah, non-judgmental does have a sort of negative. So by saying just, the way we define mindfulness at the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy is awareness of our experience in the present moment with acceptance. And with acceptance is a way of saying non-judgmentally, but I think it's a little more positive and more accessible for
right. It's sort of that classic problem of like telling you what not to do instead of telling you what to do.
Right. Yeah. And even acceptance it's not always easy. I mean, if what's happening is very unpleasant, of course, the natural reaction is to have some aversion and to want to push it away. But it's a way of orienting ourselves. Can I make room for this? Can I accept what's happening? And if not, can I accept that I don't accept what's happening?
You're right. Meta.
Yeah. You can always take a step back. Well, if I don't like this, can I step back and just accept that I don't like this?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I like that.
And then in MBCT, I think they also talk about how mindfulness is intentional, experiential, and non-judgmental. So
Yes.
So there are these dimensions that perhaps sometimes are not obvious to people from just hearing the definition of it.
Yeah. I think some people just think about it as being aware of what's happening. It's just kind of awareness, which is true. But I think there's more to it than just awareness. It's awareness, paying attention in a certain way, as John Cabot says, in the present moment, without judgment or with acceptance. And, the other thing that I like to remember is from in my own practice, as well as when I'm teaching, it's mindfulness alone is often not enough. I think mindfulness combined with wisdom and compassion is what we really need to grow, and to grow as individuals, as in our understanding of reality, of where we are, how we connect to the world and the universe around us. So bringing in the wisdom and compassion is, I think, also very important.
So in the book, Mindfulness and Psychotherapy, you write about the continuum of care from mindfulness-informed to mindfulness-based treatments.
Right.
Could you discuss that continuum?
Yeah, sure. Actually, there's even an earlier step in the continuum. The first step is simply the therapist the therapist meditates. The therapist has a meditation practice. May not even talk to the client about that, but just because through having one's own meditation practice, that will affect how you are in the relationship with the client, in the clinical encounter. It affects your presence in a way that I think is beneficial. It helps you be more present for the client, with acceptance and non-judgmentally, to just be there with the client in the present moment. So that's where it begins, is just having your own practice. Then mindfulness-informed therapy is when you don't necessarily teach mindfulness practice or meditation to the client or even suggest that the client tries it, but you ask some questions, you pursue a line of inquiry that involves bringing the client into the present moment. Like the client may be talking about some difficult experience and may be lost in his or her head, and you may pause and say, well, can you tell me, where do you feel that in your body? Can you breathe? If you find an area in the body that's responding to this, can you breathe with that, or can you breathe into that, as a way of bringing the client into the present moment? And can you make room for that? Can you bring some curiosity to that, or some acceptance to that? So it's asking questions that cultivate this attitude of mindfulness without even necessarily using the word mindfulness. So that's mindfulness informed. And then mindfulness based is the next step, where you actually begin to teach mindfulness practices to the client in session and encourage the client to practice at home.
So teaching mindfulness in the piece that you added, I think you're right. Like, it's about the way you say hello and sit, the way you respond to conflicts and questions. So you're bringing that experience to the client by virtue of embodying it yourself.
Yeah, some of it. Yeah, that's like the therapist meditates just through. Hopefully, it's it's an elusive state. But hopefully, if you do practice, you begin to embody this attitude of non-judgmental awareness and acceptance of what's going on. And certainly, I've been around meditation teachers and others who do embody that, who, you just can feel it when you're in the room with them, that they're totally present and they're there with you and they're listening, and they're not trying to sell you anything. They're not trying to, they don't have an agenda other than to be in the present moment with you and allow that to unfold. And if you're able to bring that kind of presence to the client, I think that in and of itself is very therapeutic, very healing.
Even just being around somebody who has that quality as a therapist or just as a human being, it's so refreshing.
Yes. I've seen, the Dalai Lama in a room with over 1,000 other people, and you can sense that in his presence, the way he answers questions, the way he laugh so spontaneously.
Right.
It's just, it's wonderful.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about bringing mindfulness into a therapy, maybe this is a good time to circle back to the ways that mindfulness may not be useful, or when one might not want to bring it in, or pitfalls along the road.
Sure. Yeah, well, not everyone is interested in learning about mindfulness or practicing mindfulness. And many of my clients come to me because they know that it's something that I do and that I offer, and something either they're already practicing themselves or they want to deepen their practice or do a kind of psychotherapy that is mindfulness based.
Mm-hmm.
But some people don't. Some people, find me through their insurance company or just a referral from a friend, and they really have no interest, at least initially, in learning mindfulness. So I certainly I never impose it. That is never helpful. And even those who are interested in it, there are times it can be misused. It can be used as almost a kind of avoidance, especially if some people are very adept at concentration practice, where they just kind of go into a zone and get very calm and collected and peaceful. And that's helpful, but if that's all one does, it can be a way of avoiding some deeper issues, interpersonal issues, career issues, whatever.
Right. Yeah. So someone might end up kind of getting sort of like you're saying, like avoiding the problems of daily life, or avoiding, not approaching what needs to be thought through and problem solved or what have you, but instead just kind of relying on practice that is soothing in the moment, but doesn't necessarily bring them any longer term benefit or something. Yeah.
Right. I was saying this can be true even of long-term meditators. I've known people who they almost live for being away on retreats. They do a lot of retreats and they go away on retreats and they love being on retreat. And then they come back to their daily lives and things are the same old mess as they were before. They kind of muddle through for a few months and then they go away for another retreat. And, I don't know. I don't want to be judgmental.
Right. They're sort of on your own journey.
Yeah, that's not necessarily the best use of the practice, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. You would hope that it would inform your day-to-day life in some way, in between intensive practice sessions, eventually, somehow.
And usually it does.
Right.
But not always. Yeah.
There's another sort of misunderstanding of mindfulness where people kind of think, if I'm experiencing something mindfully, then I won't experience any negative emotion or something like that.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one. We do have this image. Oh, yeah, I'm mindful. I'm very zen. I'm just kind of, calm. Nothing's going to bother me.
Right.
And no, mindfulness is opening up to, John Kabat-Zinn says, the full catastrophe. I mean, we have to remember there is suffering in life, and mindfulness does not, especially not for the first few lifetimes of practice, it does not end the suffering. It just kind of opens us up to it in some ways. Yeah,
maybe that's where the wisdom and compassion come in that you were mentioning.
Yeah, I think so. The wisdom, to me, when I think of wisdom, it's about bringing in some of the Buddhist teachings, which may or may not be appropriate depending on the client, but just it's really common sense of some of it. The three marks of existence, that there's suffering in life. It's unsatisfactory, basically. Mm-hmm. That things are impermanent, things are always changing. And that there's really this idea of a self is not as solid as we think it is. Mm. And I think bringing in kind of right view, understanding those teachings is really helpful in adding that to the mindfulness.
So I think it's helpful to underline something which you just previously said, which is that it is possible for people to use a mindfulness practice or meditation counterproductively.
Yeah.
As a way to avoid what needs to be come to terms with.
Yeah, I think that is true. And I think I've done that myself at times with my practice, just wanting to not look at things and just be concentrated and quiet and still. I've never been able to do that for very long because my mind doesn't really tend to get very concentrated very easily or stay that way. So if I sit long enough, all the troubles do tend to bubble up very eventually. But I think sometimes the wish is, oh, if I can just sit, I don't have to look at all the trouble in my life.
Yeah. We know that you teach an 8-week mindfulness-based cognitive therapy group.
Yeah.
Which is one of the specific therapeutic interventions that have been developed based on mindfulness.
Right.
Which I think also has a close relationship to John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based
stress reduction.
Stress reduction, right.
Yeah.
Now, how would you describe the ways in which these interventions are different from general mindfulness practices one might encounter in yoga or meditation classes?
Well, they're much more structured. The 8-week MBCT, Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy Program, there's a very definite structure to it. And it's actually, based on playing off what we were just saying, it's actually designed to help people find a way to turn towards the pain, turn towards the suffering. It's specifically designed for people who suffer from depression. It was initially developed specifically for people with recurrent major depression as a way to prevent relapse. Now, since then, it's been expanded to include all types of depression and anxiety and other forms of emotional distress. But the way it's set up is to gradually help people, first of all, get established with a mindfulness practice by focusing on the body, on the breath, doing homework so that that becomes established, so they have an anchor, a safe anchor they can go to. But then by about week 4, they're looking at thoughts and feelings and trying to bring mindfulness to some of the painful thoughts and feelings that are associated with depression. And in fact, sometimes even intentionally bringing up some of their most difficult thoughts and to see if they can just be aware of them and see them as just thoughts, which is very challenging, but very helpful and very useful. I've seen many people benefit from the program and get past some significant blocks in their life. It's really about opening up to the life that's inside them, even if it's painful, because depression so much, often it isn't so much that people are just overly sad. It's almost like they're numb or they're blocked off from part of their inner experience. And the only way to get there, the only way out is to go through it and to encounter the pain, open to it, see it for what it is, see that it's not, in many cases, not as bad as you thought it was, and to let it go, to work through it just by allowing yourself to feel it and then move on to the next thing. Realize that it too is impermanent and not who you are ultimately.
Do you think of it primarily as a depression intervention, or do you find it would be helpful for other difficulties?
Yeah, it was designed primarily for depression, but when I advertise my group, I say it's for depression and anxiety. So I think any of the affective disorders, it can also be used for other disorders as well. People use it for substance abuse, for PTSD. In the MBCT program, at least the way I teach it, it's designed primarily for anxiety and depression. But
one idea that I've encountered is this idea that you can't stop yourself from feeling only the feelings you don't want to feel. If you can't do a surgical strike on just those feelings. If you cut out those feelings, then you cut out generally the whole realm of feeling,
right? Including joy and excitement and happiness. Yes,
right. So I was thinking about whether that fits with your experience, and then the sort of how you might sell it to somebody with depression or anxiety who says, you want me to mindfully experience what? All my suffering, I'm here to stop, I'm here to fix or something,
Yeah. I might have to rethink this. Maybe there is a different way to sell it, but I don't necessarily sell it as a way of achieving greater joy,
right,
but as a way of preventing depression or anxiety from spiraling out of control.
Mm-hmm.
That often if we can catch it early, like just those first few thoughts of depression or those first few depressed feelings or whatever, maybe it's something in the body, instead of spiraling down, because it's almost a learned behavior, or learned response.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's that feeling, there's that sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Oh, it's depression again. And then the negative thoughts kick in, and before you know it, the person is down in the dumps.
Mm-hmm.
Or with anxiety, you begin to have this thought about, oh, what if things don't go so well at the presentation tomorrow? And again, your breathing gets shallow, and you start sweating, and before you know it, you're having an anxiety attack or a panic attack.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can intervene early in that process with some mindfulness and say, oh no, this is just a thought. I don't have to get rid of it. I don't have to change it. I don't have to pay attention to it. I can actually just note it and then shift my attention to something else that is more neutral or more wholesome. So that's the way I usually sell it, as a way of kind of preventing depression from taking over, or preventing anxiety from taking over. We're not going to get rid of your depression or get rid of sadness or get rid of anxiety. It's part of being human. We all have times when we're depressed and anxious. We just don't want to get to the point where the depression takes over and we shut down completely.
Of course, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy is based on the book, The Mindful Way Through Depression. As a meditator, reading through it, though, I thought teachings that I have heard along the way in different traditions are explained beautifully in a very clear fashion. I would think that people who want to deepen their meditation practice could find a lot of help in attending a group such as yours.
Yes, and I've had a number of people over the years who do have a long-term meditation practice, but they still struggle with recurrent depression or chronic anxiety. And, I think that's the kind of, maybe they've been going to a meditation center and practicing with a teacher or practicing in a sangha. And sometimes in those settings, mental health issues are not talked about explicitly. The teachers don't have the training, for one thing. And plus, in those kind of settings, often you get the idea, oh, you're supposed to just be calm and happy and peaceful. So I think in the setting of MBCT, where it's explicitly said, no, we're going to talk about depression and anxiety, and we're going to talk about how you can apply the skills of mindfulness and compassion to the experience of depression and anxiety. We're going to talk about that explicitly. It gives people permission to, not just permission, but also shows them exactly how to do this in a group setting with other people who are struggling with similar issues, which also helps. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I was thinking, it sounds like at the first part of your group, those first few weeks, you spend a lot of time, it sounds like, helping people really establish a practice. Mm-hmm. And I know that that's something that a lot of people wrestle with, and probably some of our listeners wrestle with. So I'm curious if you have any good tips or ideas or things that really seem to help people get traction, sort of in between your group sessions or at home as they're trying to do that.
Yeah, and that's one.
Or even your own experience.
Yeah, yeah. That's one reason why many people take the course, is they think I've been trying to get a regular meditation practice going, and I just haven't been able to do it on my own. I might sit for a few days in a row or a week, and then I fall off the wagon, and pretty soon a month goes by and I haven't practiced at all. So the group is a good way to have someone else to be accountable to. I mean, first of all, there's the kind of peer pressure. You're in the group and you've signed up for this 8-week group and you've paid your money, and you're told right up front that a big part of the program is doing the homework, which means sitting at least 30 to 45 minutes every day. If you don't do that, you might get something out of the program if you just come to class once a week, but you're really not, where the real learning takes place is sitting every day and doing that practice. So by signing up for a program like this or any similar program, having that kind of structure and peer pressure of being in a group and having a teacher or a group leader, that can help you, give you some incentive. If you're practicing on your own, similar, it helps to just, as I did when I first started practicing, when I read Journey of Awakening, I just decided, all right, 30 days, I can do this, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening. If after 30 days I don't think it's helpful, I'll stop. But after 30 days, I definitely saw a difference. So setting up some kind of structure for yourself if you don't have a group, maybe just commit to sitting. It doesn't have to be 20 minutes in the morning or 20 minutes in the evening. That's a lot. It could be just 10 minutes once a day before I leave the house. Before I leave even I have to get up 10 minutes earlier. I'm going to practice for 10 minutes every day for a given period of time. And to try to do it at the same time every day too. That's helpful. Mm-hmm. The less you have to think about it, the more you can sort of get into, well, in some sense, automatic pilot. This is just something I do. After I eat my meals, I brush my teeth. When I get up in the morning before I leave the house, meditation is part of that routine.
Yeah, I have found that it helps to have the consistency first and then extend the time. So like build the habit, even if it's really short. And then over time, you start to feel the benefit and you want to sit a little longer. But even if it's just a couple minutes going through the motion.
Exactly. You want to make it easy for yourself at first. And then hopefully, as you start to taste some of the benefits, you'll want to extend the time, and it'll be easier to extend the time instead of saying, all right, I'm going to sit for an hour, and it's going to be frustrating. Or for many people, it will be, and you'll get discouraged and you'll stop.
One thing I tell people is if you get off the cushion and you think, thank God that's over, that's not a good, you've sat too long. Yeah, it's better to be wanting a little bit more than feeling like, oh, you've had way too much.
Right. And then one of the ways I thought MBCT does a brilliant way of explaining Dharma teaching is that when they talk about the being mode versus the doing mode.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to say a few things about that and how that ends up. That is important, not as a metaphysical aspiration, but a very practical aspect of applying.
Yeah, they make this distinction between the doing mode, which is, what we're in most of the time in our culture. We're always doing things. We're cleaning up things around the house. We're getting dressed. We're cooking dinner. We're going to work. We're doing things. We're making phone calls. We're on our computers. We're sending text. We're driving our cars. I mean, there's so many things to do in life. And we think doing is the way to get ahead. It's the way to solve problems. And if it's a problem in the physical world, that is generally true. You need to do things in order to have a direct effect on the physical world. But when it comes to our emotional states, our internal world, the doing mode is not so helpful. And in fact, it's counterproductive. If we're experiencing, for example, difficult emotional states, depression, anxiety, whatever, and we want to do something about it, basically, what that translates into is we want to get rid of it. Usually that means thinking about it, trying to talk ourselves out of it, beating ourselves up because we're feeling that way. And that just gets us in deeper. So with MBCT and with mindfulness practice in general, we talk about making the shift to the being mode. Instead of trying to do something about, the sinking feeling in your stomach or the feeling of fear or the difficult thoughts, can you just be with them? Can you just notice them? Can you just allow them to be there and see what happens? Maybe they'll get worse. Maybe they'll go away. Maybe you'll forget about them, but you don't have to do anything. You can allow them to just evolve on their own, or you can shift your attention to something else if they start to become too much.
It's really a different orientation towards your thoughts. It sounds like they're sort of approaching your thoughts in a different way, like that they're, like you said a few minutes ago, you don't even have to pay attention to that thought.
Right. And I always say,
what a relief.
Yeah, exactly. I would say it's a different way of not so much relating to your thoughts, but just relating to thoughts.
Yes.
Not necessarily even seeing them as your thoughts.
Right.
These are thoughts that are arising. Well, who says they're your thoughts? These thoughts came about because of all kinds of other people you've talked to and things you've heard on TV, and it's just nature unfolding. It's the nature of the mind, the thinking mind. That's what it does. It's doing its job. It's thinking thoughts. You have this other capacity to be aware of thoughts, and you can step back and see, oh, thoughts are arising. They're not necessarily my thoughts. They're just thoughts. I can let them just kind of keep going until they're done.
That's such a good point, because I was thinking as you were saying that I remember talking to people and having the insight myself, as well as other people kind of realizing when they have a thought that like, right, that's not even my thought. It's like an implant from a family member, a parent, a teacher, or society or something. Like it's in my head, but I don't even believe it. It's just rolling around in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's helpful to ask, oh, so where did this thought come from?
Right.
And then when it disappears, where did it go?
Right. Yeah.
And also, I think one aspect of the doing mode, as they talk about in MBCT, is the experiencing things directly. So then that changes towards a non-striving orientation.
Yeah, the being mode. The being mode is doing things. Yeah, experiencing things directly. Right. Instead of turning it into a problem, seeing it as just, this is life unfolding, and I just want to be with it. There's value in that, even if it's not exactly what I want right now. It's what's here. So it's finding a way to connect with what's here instead of wishing it to be something else.
So in terms of the MBCT program, it sounds like a definite emphasis on daily practice, 30 to 45 minutes, which sounds like I'm impressed that people are coming there and make that happen. That's great.
Yeah,
right. And then also like working with thoughts and mindfully experiencing your thoughts and feelings. Are there other key elements of the program that we haven't talked about yet? What else people might expect?
Well, it's also about bringing mindfulness into daily life. It's not just the formal practice. Mm-hmm. And by the way, the formal practice, the meditations, they may be 30 to 45 minutes, but they're all guided meditations. So that's a little bit easier for beginners, so they're not just sitting with themselves. They have someone who's taking them through the meditation.
Oh, that's helpful, yeah.
But yeah, bringing it into daily life, noticing, for example, there's one week we do the pleasant experiences calendar, where every day you're supposed to notice a pleasant experience and then write down what your response is to it. What did you feel in your body? What kind of thoughts did you have? And what kind of emotions did you experience? And that's helpful because it helps people see that whole connection between thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations. And it also helps people begin to notice more pleasant things in their life, which if they're feeling depressed, often they just kind of dismiss those. Then the next week we do unpleasant experiences and noticing unpleasant experiences and what's your response to those. So that's part of the homework. Or it's bringing mindfulness into some activity of daily life, like brushing your teeth or eating or whatever you choose. People have some choice into that.
Does it also include Jon Kabat-Zinn's body scan?
Yes. It's not exactly Jon Kabat-Zinn's, but we start with the body scan, just like the MBSR program starts with the body scan, because for most people, grounding the attention in the body, especially if they're dealing with depression and anxiety, which tends to be more emotional and cognitive, it's helpful to just get connected with the body first. So for the first 2 weeks, actually, we do the body scan practice. That's the homework. And then we add mindfulness of the breath. Again, we gradually move from the body to which is obviously very tangible and concrete, to things that are less tangible and less concrete. The body to the breath, to sounds, to emotions, and finally to thoughts.
So this may be, the MBCT may be an alternative to people perhaps considering mindfulness-based stress reduction program, because it sort of incorporates part of that, but builds on it towards a more meditative practice that's also very practical with everyday difficulties like depression. Yeah,
I think what I tell people, because some people are thinking about, well, should I do MBSR or MBCT? They're very similar, but MBSR is much more general about just stress reduction, whether it's because of an illness or because of busy life or whatever. MBCT is more explicitly geared towards depression, anxiety, and emotional distress. I've even had a number of people who did MBSR first and then did MBCT later and found it beneficial because, again, they were dealing with depression and anxiety, and that wasn't addressed so much in MBSR, but it is in MBCT.
So it sounds like mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, is a little bit more broad in its application, and
yeah, exactly.
Got it. And then MBCT really is focused on depression and anxiety treatment. Yeah. So we're curious a little bit if you're willing to share about your own practice these days and what's going on sort of for you in terms of, how your meditation practice looks.
Sure.
People are always curious about how other people manage to do it.
Well, I still sit 20 minutes every morning. I don't necessarily sit also 20 minutes every evening anymore. And sometimes I sit longer than that, sometimes shorter, but I try to do at least 20 minutes a day, and I'm pretty faithful about that. I've been trying to bring mindfulness into daily life a lot more. I used to do a lot of retreats. When I say a lot of retreats, it depends on who you compare yourself to, I guess. But I started doing retreats in 1988, and pretty much from 1988 up until about maybe 3 years ago, I always did at least 1 week-long retreat a year, sometimes 2. So that's, add that up, that's a fair number of, and that was a regular part. I think I'm going to do at least 1 long retreat a year.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, I haven't been drawn to retreat practice the last few years.
Mm-hmm. And
I'm much more drawn to practice in daily life. I've been very much influenced lately by Utejaniya.
What's that?
Utejaniya is a teacher, a Burmese teacher. He's a Burmese monk who teaches in the Vipassana tradition.
I see. You will have to spell that for us at some point so we can put their name in the show notes.
I can do it right now.
Okay, great.
U is just the letter U, that's the letter U.
Okay.
And then Tejaniya is Tejaniya.
Great. Thank you.
And he very much talks about the importance of practicing mindfulness throughout the day, from the moment you wake up in the morning until the moment you fall asleep at night, to continually try to just be aware of what's happening. And it doesn't have to be he emphasizes too, it doesn't have to be hard work. It doesn't have to be this kind of microscopic awareness, but it's just a matter of remembering to just come from that place of awareness. Can you be aware that you're speaking? Can you be aware that you're seeing? Normally we're not, we're just kind of lost in what we're saying or lost in what we're looking at. We're lost in the objects of our attention instead of being aware of the awareness itself.
Yeah, no, that just brought up a thought or /question/challenge, which is that sometimes, I'm thinking specifically with, anxiety and depression, really, there's this self-observation that becomes problematic, like you're watching yourself as you're, talking to somebody, and then suddenly you have this part of you that steps outside yourself and starts judging yourself, saying like, gosh, I look really stupid right now, or boy, I wonder what this person thinks of me, or there's some way in which they kind of, step outside themselves. And I was just thinking that kind of self-observation is not helpful, because I guess that's more self-assessment or something.
Or self-consciousness.
Yes, right.
This is more self-awareness. I had a friend who wrote a poem once that I liked very much. It was, be aware, be conscious, be self-aware, don't be self-conscious.
That's good, right.
Be aware, be conscious, be self-aware, don't be self-conscious. So we don't want to be self-conscious, but we want to be self-aware. And it's not even that, it's coming from a place where it's not even really you're looking at yourself. You're looking at you're starting to see that there is no self, that, there's just these responses and reactions and things are happening. No one's really in charge, but you can step back and just kind of see it all unfold. And it's it can be very entertaining and kind of amazing, to just kind of watch it.
Right, because when you're stepping back in that kind of in a witnessing place, right, you're sort of taking it all in. You're sort of having your experience. You're observing what's going on, not just in you, but in the whole thing.
Right.
Whereas when it's that has a depressive, anxious quality, it does tend to be really like self-focused energy and self-critical kind of energy.
Again, it's non-judgmental. It's with acceptance, with compassion.
Yes. You had mentioned doing a lot of retreats, but then kind of feeling, for whatever reason, more recently that you haven't felt called to do that in the last couple of years. So I'm curious for people who are listening who maybe have never done a retreat or done one or two, or what do you think over the many years of doing retreats was helpful for you about that, or when might you advise someone to do one or not do one? Or
I think they can be very helpful, and they definitely have been helpful to me. I don't regret any of the retreats I've done. It's a chance to really go deeper in your practice and to really see some of the deeply ingrained patterns and conditioning that we have, whether it's our own personal conditioning through our childhood experience and through the experiences we've had personally, or just our conditioning as human beings, and to really get to a quieter place where you can watch that and see it unfold on a more microscopic level can be very helpful. And challenging. I mean, I'll be honest, I've always found retreats challenging. I always have moments in retreats where I think, why did I do this? I just want to go home and watch TV or something.
Right. It can be hard to sit with your own mind for long stretches.
Yeah. But then to realize that, it's possible that this can be done.
Yeah.
And you can get through it and learn something from it. Very valuable.
I seem to come back after I do a retreat with a different vantage point on my own life, like whatever's going on in my life at a given time. If I go, it's just similar with travel too, but it's different and more kind of mindful. You sort of step out of your life and then you're kind of in this other world for a while, and then coming back into it, it's sort of like things are seen with fresh eyes.
You see things more clearly. I mean, literally, I remember the first retreat I did. It was just a weekend retreat. It was out at IMS in Barrie, and I'd been practicing on my own for a year. And I thought, well, let me try a retreat. Mm-hmm. And it was a weekend long, and it was okay. It wasn't that long. It was kind of boring for the most part. I thought, well, didn't really get any big insights. Didn't really think much happened. And so I said, well, I'm glad I did this, but I don't think I really need to do any more retreats. And I went out to my car, and I started the car. And the radio came on because it had been on when I drove out there. And I couldn't believe how loud it was. It was so loud. I immediately turned it down. I thought, oh, wow, that's weird. I thought that was just fine driving out here, but now it just seemed way too loud. And then I got home and walked into my apartment and turned on the lights. And I looked at the wall and I saw all these, like specks and marks on the wall. And I said, oh, this place needs to be painted.
Right.
I mean, literally, I was seeing things more clearly. I was seeing things that I had been living with and hadn't really noticed. And it's like, wow. So my senses were sharpened. Yeah. Like this veil had been kind of lifted from my eyes.
Yes, absolutely.
And continuing on from your meditation experience, how much meditation do you recommend people engage in? And also, in what form, like concentration versus mindfulness, formal versus informal?
Yeah, I think that's very much an individual thing. I don't have any real formula for that. As Kate said earlier, I think it's best for most people to start small. I think it's more important to have a consistent practice over time, to practice on a regular basis every day, if possible, even if it's just for a short amount of time. Mm-hmm. And then I would encourage people to experiment with different forms. If it's to try concentration practice, where you're just focusing on one object and trying to quiet the mind and still the mind. And then to do more open awareness, more just vipassana, or insight practice, where you're just opening to different aspects of one's experience. And follow your heart and you don't want to be too complacent or too easy on yourself and to always just settle for the easiest thing. But at the same time, you want to do what feels right for you.
So we're thinking about wrapping up.
Okay.
And how's that feel for you?
Fine. Feels fine.
Good. Okay. So where can people find you or engage with you further, or these ideas? What are you up to? How can people look you up? Are there books you recommend or suggest?
Sure. I have a website. It's mbctboston.com. I have all my contact information there as well. My phone number and email address, and people could contact me through that website.
Fantastic. And we will put all that information in the show notes for the episode as well. So
sure, great.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for all of your good effort out there in the world, bringing mindfulness to people, particularly people with depression and anxiety. That's much needed these days, I think. So,
yeah, I think so too. More than ever.
Yes, right. Yeah. So thank you. And thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening today. This podcast was brought to you by the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the integration of mindfulness, meditation, and psychotherapy. For more information, visit meditationandpsychotherapy.org.